Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for taking part in this webinar. So thank you for Sue Kin and Malcolm McNeil from DFID, from the Research and Evidence Division, to give us their thoughts on how to write a good research proposal for funding. This has come from a need that we identified within RESYST whenever we've had discussions about what needs to be done in capacity development. Everybody always points out that they need help in developing funding proposals, and it's something that's quite difficult to do. It's more something to do practically in groups to an actual response to a call. But Malcolm and Sue have very kindly decided to come and give this webinar about what DFID are looking for in a funding proposal, and quite a lot of what are they looking for are quite general to other funding proposals as well. So the STRIVE Research Program Consortium have very kindly offered to host this webinar. They hold these webinars on a monthly basis, so thank you very much to STRIVE. And we've also invited the Future Health Systems Consortium and the Rebuild Consortium to take part. So I'll hand over to Sue and Malcolm.
So it's either good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you happen to be sitting. For us, it's good morning. And we're delighted to be here to talk to you, and we hope that we'll be able to stimulate quite a lot of questions and discussion towards the end. We thought what we'd do is go very quickly through some background slides, and the slides will be available on the web so that you can come and look back at them. I'm not sure how long they'll be there, but for a long time, I'm sure. And I think that the session's being recorded so that people can then listen to it later on. So the first point really is to think about why we need to do research. And from a development agency's perspective, we need to think about what is the best way to put into practice different development interventions. And many current advances in development are resting on quite old evidence from research that was done some time ago. But what we also know is that the best researched areas are often the ones where there's been the greatest progress. So we would look to evidence around vaccinations and child mortality to show that these highly researched areas have actually made good progress. But in many places, what works, any new products or new innovations, are actually very thin on the ground. Some of the evidence is of very poor quality or just missing. And so there's a lot of areas of development where we don't know what the best thing to do is. We also know that if we don't continue to invest in research, we'll go backwards. We know that pathogens develop resistance to prevention and control mechanisms, and if we don't have new research, then the old tools stop working. New diseases can emerge, others which are already there might become more virulent, and natural disasters and shocks can have a devastating impact on people's lives and livelihoods, and we need to be able to know what is the best way of dealing with those. Most of all, we need to think about how we scale up services, and it's a big issue in many different agencies about knowing what works but not knowing how to actually roll it out at scale. And we need to understand the key development questions so we can help different agencies and governments support their best policy choices, and we need research to do all of these things.
Hi, good morning. It's Malcolm here. I wanted to say a few words about what we do in the Research and Evidence Division in DFID. So in the Research and Evidence Division, our mission is to identify and generate the best evidence, knowledge, technology and ideas to improve the effectiveness of development and convey these to various stakeholders to inform policy and programs and practice. For us, it's not just enough to do the research and write it up. We're actually looking for influence on policy and practice so that we start to see changes. So our research program has three broad aims, and the reason we're going to discuss this with you is so that you would have an idea before you write your own proposal about how you might look at what the funding agency is looking for. So three broad aims, so development of new technologies which will have an impact on the diseases of poverty, better and more cost-effective ways of delivering, and making sure that the context for policy choices and delivery is clear. And we try to provide new knowledge and rigorous evidence to address the many challenges that we face in poverty reduction. We feel that research must be seen as a development intervention and not just research for its own sake. Research needs to have development outcomes and impact. And that means that research needs to be grounded and practical, delivering high-quality global public health goods. DFID commissioned research. What are we looking for? Well, first and foremost, always, is that it has to be high quality. But DFID-funded research has significant differences from the research that you'll find commissioned by research councils and charities and so on. We're focusing on poverty reduction. We're focusing on the problems being faced in developing countries by governments, service providers and citizens. And as I said earlier, we want to get research findings into policy and practice. This is often known as GRIP, getting research into policy and practice, and doing it quickly. So often we find that there's excellent research in the learned peer-reviewed journals, but it does not get into policy and practice. So we've got this very strong focus in DFID about the GRIP. And I've said the first consideration is high quality, but we've got a strong focus on the development part of research and development. We're actively encouraging partnerships between institutions in the north and those based in low-income countries. We want to encourage these partnerships so that we enable capacity building and genuine collaboration. Adult-to-adult partnerships are really important. And we're also encouraging partnerships between the public sector and the private sector.
What does DFID want to achieve from its research? And I think having an understanding of what your funding agency wants to achieve helps you really think through how you pitch your bid for funding. And for a development agency, for DFID in particular, what we're looking for is a mixture of innovation and risk together with more established research. We want to see a mix of research methods, and many of our funding streams will say that, for instance, we want people to develop clinical trials, but there must be a qualitative element embedded within the clinical trial. And other types of research that we fund, we're always looking for a mixture and to have different disciplines feeding into the research. We're also quite interested in how we can work better with the private sector. In much of the research that we commission, there is an element of capacity building, which is built in different ways. We've already mentioned GRIP, getting research into policy and practice, and it'll come up many times because that's one of our key focus areas. And the use of effective partnerships and influencing. So these are all the sorts of things that when we read a research proposal, we're looking to see how the people who put the proposal together are addressing these issues. There are obviously lots of challenges which we all know about around research, as well as getting research into policy and practice. There's also the issue of what do you do when you're starting to work in an area where there is no evidence. And for health, that might be less apparent than in some of the other areas where colleagues of ours are commissioning research, where there really is no evidence base at all. And there we're looking to see how people are going to get research out of practice, which means how are people going to collect data from interventions which are already being delivered, or for new interventions that people are planning, with a proper and strong monitoring and evaluation system built in, so that as they're being rolled out, these programs can deliver some quality evidence to help decisions in the future. The other element of this is also finding out what doesn't work. So if research shows us that something we're doing commonly doesn't work, it's how do we stop that? We need to also think about how we can better measure impact over time and what we can say about the research and what's happened as a result of the research. For DFID in particular, we have an issue around what is a global public good and what's a local country need. And some of the research that we commission will be globally of relevance, but may not be of relevance at that particular time in a particular country because the government's not focusing on it just then. And how do we make sure we have a good balance? One of the things about research is that the timescales for research are quite long, and the timescales for policy are often very, very short. And how do we marry those two? Because very frequently we're asked for information about research that's going on in timescales which are much too short for the research. So when we're reading a proposal, we're also looking to see how might the research team be able to provide information at different stages during the project before it comes to an end. And we're looking for how researchers are thinking about improving access to information and evidence for different decision makers. From DFID's perspective, the central research budget, which is managed by Research and Evidence Division, is about 3% of DFID's total budget, which this year is around about £330 million, which is quite a considerable amount of money. And in the last financial year, this was balanced across about a third going to UK institutions, about a third going to international and overseas institutions, and about a third going directly to southern institutions. And some of the work involved in this is strengthening tertiary education sectors in Africa and Asia directly. Funding goes to a range of different organisations. We might provide core funding to international research organisations, for instance, the CG, which are the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, ICDDRB, the International Centre for Diarrhoea Disease Research in Bangladesh is another example. We might give core funding to product development partnerships who are developing new health technologies, or the research programme consortia, such as the ones involved in this call today. Sometimes we give direct funding to other programmes. For instance, we have a programme looking at artemisinin in resistance in Southeast Asia, which is receiving direct funding from DFID. We do a lot of collaborations with other donors, including research councils in the UK.
So now we get to the meat of what we're presenting today. What is it that funders want from researchers when we get a proposal from you? This checklist here on this slide is an important step-by-step that we would go through when we are evaluating a research proposal. Step one, is this high-quality research, and is it likely to have outcomes that are relevant to DFID in our approach to reduce poverty? Secondly, is this research going to answer timely and relevant questions, or is it a minority thing that's actually not going to be much use to many people? Thirdly, and becoming increasingly important these days, does this proposal represent value for money? And we'll talk about that as we go through. Next, is there serious potential for impact from this research? Are we likely to see that it's going to make a difference on the ground? And then we have this interesting notion of, are these researchers a safe pair of hands? What does that mean? Well, it means this. Do we have confidence that this group of researchers are going to deliver technically on the research? Do they have the institutional and management capacity that they will be able to manage this effectively? And is the financial arrangements, budgeting, and the financial oversight, does it give a sense of confidence that the funding will be handled safely and properly? So this slide is, if you like, a useful checklist for you as we go through. We will also be asking things like, is the research of the highest technical quality? Who do we think is best placed to answer these questions? Is there value added for DFID being involved? What's the aim of the funding? Is it clear? Is it only research, pure research, or does it have elements of capacity building and partnership with developing country researchers and policymakers? An increasingly important issue for DFID are what are the transaction costs for DFID? We don't have a huge amount of staff, and so we have to be able to work with programs that don't require an awful lot of hand-holding and management time. Is there clear evidence of value for money? And are we going to see research uptake, not advocacy? And I do emphasize the difference. Research uptake is about getting high-quality research into policy and practice, and that's very different from advocacy, where people are just wanting to push a particular line. And we find with some of the large NGOs, the line is very blurred between research uptake and advocacy. So your research proposal should include innovation and risk. DFID welcomes proposals where there's an element of risk. Many of our research programs are actually high risk, but we feel that that's important to fund these because we have to move forward the research agenda. As Sue mentioned earlier, we want a mixture of research methods, working with the private sector, capacity building, getting research into policy and practice, and partnerships and funding.
Okay, so going on to some of the issues that we're looking for around the being a safe pair of hands. So when we're looking at the technical side of this, we want to make sure the proposal directly addresses the call and the priorities of the funder. What we can see, researchers don't seem to realise, but we can see when people have a pet project that they try and fit to meet the call. And it's usually very obvious that that's the case. We are making sure that people are using the appropriate research methods and that they match the level of ambition of the research to the budget and the time and the resources which are being requested. And very frequently we will see proposals which are extremely ambitious, which are underfunded, have got too few people working on them to actually be able to deliver what the researchers are promising. And we need also to make sure that all the people who are named and budgeted for have a clear added value for the specific research proposal. And we see lots of proposals where we have named individuals, but it's very unclear to us exactly what they are going to be doing in that proposal. Looking at the institutional and managerial issues, we are looking to make sure that the proposals aren't beyond the institutional capacity for delivery. And we often see very ambitious proposals from organisations which probably don't have the capacity to be able to deliver them. And we really are looking out for that all the time. We want people to keep things as simple as possible to avoid any excessive complexity in the governance arrangements or the technical approaches. And I know some people will come back to us and say, oh, but you asked for particularly complex types of arrangements in some of the funding that you're proposing. But we're not looking for people to add more complexity, and wherever possible to be as simple as possible. We want to make sure that you have the appropriate partners that bring the required expertise, and we need all of the senior and expensive staff to be justified and for their role to be very explicit. And we want junior or inexperienced staff to be being used appropriately, whether that's for building their capacity, for them to add value in different ways. We don't want to see a lot of junior staff just to save money. We want to understand exactly what everyone's roles are going to be. And it's very common for people to underestimate the financial and managerial requirements to deliver research effectively. And so if somebody sends a proposal to us which we think is likely to be under-resourced, we will come back. We won't say, oh, that's good because it's very cheap. We'll say, no, we're a bit worried about that because we don't think there's the capacity.
Okay, let's look at a very important aspect of a research proposal, and that's the financial and budget issues. We often get asked questions about, well, how do I prepare a good financial proposal? How do I prepare a good budget? Well, I think the most important thing is the first point there, that the technical proposals have to be closely linked to the budget. So when I read your technical proposal, and then when I turn to the budget, then the technical proposal should be reflected in the budget. And honestly, you'd be amazed how often it is that it looks as if the person who wrote the technical proposal has not met the person who wrote the budget. Sometimes the budgets are written by different departments from the technical proposal. So there has to be a very close linkage between the technical proposal and the budget. Now, many funders have specific things that are excluded from their budgets. So if a funding agency excludes certain things, you need to be aware of it, and you need to avoid having that in the budget, because the funder will then immediately reject the proposal. A very common thing that we find is that the daily rates for staff, that's particularly the senior staff, are listed at a very high level. So many funding agencies, including DFID, we will do the calculations. And I mean, if a proposal says that a certain staff member is getting an astronomical daily rate, then we will count that up and compare that with the published salary scales. So the rates for staff need to cover the costs, but not to be excessive. Now, a particular issue for the current government in the UK is that they're very concerned about excessive spend on travel and conferences, and we have tried to say that some travel is essential and some dissemination at conferences is also essential, but avoiding excessive spend and particularly excessive numbers of individuals attending conferences. Make sure the budget's clear and easy to follow. And a final point, this is particularly for agencies in the north. You discover on some programmes that the lion's share of the budget is allocated to the partner in the north, and the budget is not apportioned fairly between all the different partners who are doing the work. So that's the key issues on finance and budgeting.
I'm just going to go very quickly through the next couple of slides. The information will be here, but not spend a lot of time. From a DFID perspective, you must have a clear research uptake strategy to make sure that your findings will get taken up as quickly as possible. And one of the areas which DFID is really interested in, and increasingly public funders, is around open access publishing and making sure that the results of publicly funded research are available as widely as possible, as quickly as possible. Another aspect of the work is around capacity building, and first and foremost you need to check whether this is included and funding is available, and then you need to think quite carefully about how you integrate that within the proposal. And we need to think about the mix between long-term and short-term activities, and that there is a good gender balance, and that you can demonstrate that. And increasingly, DFID, and I suspect some other funding agencies, are looking to see numbers around men and women involved in the research in different ways. You also need to check whether funding is available for community engagement, and if it is, to take it very seriously and think carefully about how you're going to do it. Not tokenism, but real, proper engagement. So to summarise what we've said, you've also got to keep in mind writing up the research very quickly so that it's not sitting around for 4 or 5 years before it gets into the public domain, that you don't overclaim the findings, that you're very neutral about the findings, but that you also don't bury any negative findings. In the Research and Evidence Division, we're spending quite a lot of time trying to train the rest of DFID to understand that research which shows something that doesn't work is as important, or maybe even more important, than research that shows something that does work. In terms of writing up, we need you to be able to make complex technical findings accessible to non-specialists, because many people who are going to read this research are not specialists, but they need to take home the messages about what they should be doing. You need to keep thinking about getting research into practice and the impact of the research, and keep using your mixed methods, which will include a whole range of different things, and we've just here listed economic evaluation, social science, but there's many others.
So now we're getting towards the end, and we're often asked, what are the things that put you off as a researcher, a research funder? What do you find in proposals that immediately generates a negative reaction and you're likely to reject the proposal? So here's a little checklist of things that irritate funding agencies, and you need to try and avoid these things. If your application is late and incomplete, it's likely to be rejected. We always find that rushed applications are almost always lower quality. You should certainly ask clarifying questions, but you may find that these questions are already answered in the call documentation or on the online help or other sources. So if you're going to ask clarifying questions, make sure they've not been answered already. And then ask questions that are relevant to the stage of your application. We often get questions from people that are not relevant unless they get through to the next stage of the research funding. So your questions should be relevant to the stage that you're at. And funding agencies are serious when they say that there is a limit on wording and that there are clear instructions. So if it says 10 pages and you submit 20, then that's not going to be helpful for your application. Some funding agencies will only read up to the limit that is stated in the proposal, and don't include annexes unless they've been requested. And one of Sue Kinn's favourite problems, if you like, is that you can get 30 or 40 electronic files on the due date, and they all say DFID proposal. So that's not particularly helpful for us. We need clear labelling of electronic files.
So, just to finalise at this point, here are our top tips and blunders to avoid. The first of which is read the terms of reference to the call very carefully and check that you are responding to what's been asked for, not what you want to do. Please don't shoehorn your favourite research proposal into a call where it doesn't fit, because we actually can tell. Describe clearly what you propose to do and what you expect to achieve. Show how the research is responding to needs described in the call, and do this in plain English wherever you can. Be honest about your own expertise and capacity, and make clear how you will address any shortcomings. Stick to the page limits and the word limits, and don't change the format. Don't make the font smaller just so you can fit more in. Don't add a title page if it's not asked for. And as Malcolm just said, please do name your electronic files sensibly. So we'll stop at this point for any questions, and happy to answer anything that comes up.
Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks so much to Malcolm and to Sue. That was really interesting and clarifying. I can see Cara Hansen typing something in. You say a few times work with the private sector. Can you elaborate on how you do that?
Good. Well, I think, Cara, there's no simple answer to this, and it will depend very much on the circumstances and where you're working. We have quite a lot of research that we fund, which is through product development partnerships, where there are very strong partnerships with the private sector, be that large pharmaceutical companies or small biotech companies. The other areas where other types of researchers may want to work with the private sector, I think will depend very much on the context. And if you're working in an environment where there are private health providers, you may want to start working with them. Or if there are other types of private sector that are interested in the work, whether it's possible to think about how you might work with them. And it might require quite a bit of thinking outside the box to think about the right sorts of incentives for everyone to work together. But I don't think we can give you a right and wrong answer about how to do that.
It's been quite interesting working with some of our research programs. The Diarrheal Disease Research Centre in Bangladesh has done some interesting work with the private sector about producing locally appropriate foods for diarrheal disease control. And we've also seen in quite a number of the clinical trials that we fund that the private sector is often willing to fund the cost of some of the drugs and participate in the trials. The DART and ARROW trials about antiretroviral therapy for HIV in adults and children respectively, there was a very heavy involvement of the private sector. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Cara asks a follow-up question. She says, would you include the private sector both as an object of research and as a way to do the research?
I think that's entirely possible, as long as it's very clearly articulated in the proposal as to what you want to do and why and how you think you're going to go about it. I think that's absolutely fine.
I think it's well known that the current government are particularly interested in involvement of the private sector, but I think it has always to be appropriate for the research programme that's involved.
That's great. I had a question myself, if no one else has one urgently. You talked about the distinction in terms of research uptake between uptake and advocacy, and I wondered if you could expand a bit on that to give us a bit more guidance.
Yeah, I think this is a particular issue of some of the larger NGOs, but we sometimes see it also in other research institutions. So sometimes you have an NGO, they have a particular line that they want to take on an issue, and then they commission research that is specifically designed to reinforce that line, and they ignore any findings that will not reinforce the policy line that they choose to take. So what basically we're saying is that we're a research funding agency, and we do not fund advocacy, but we're very, very interested in getting research into policy and practice. And you do cross a line when you go beyond your research findings. And we've seen this with particular enthusiasts who have a particular leading role to play on one subject or another. Their research findings are published, but actually what they're saying is going way beyond the research findings, and they're straying into the realm of advocacy other than sticking to what their research is actually showing.
That's great. I think it does raise interesting questions about the distinction between disseminating particular findings and sharing those findings in the context of a synthesis of what is known in the field already. We now have a slew of questions, and I wondered if I can call on Deborah Barron. Can you unmute yourself, Deborah?
Hi, thanks for this presentation. It was very useful. I actually wanted to ask, there were a few points you all made about, ensuring research proposals are not too ambitious and ensuring you don't underestimate staff needs, things like that. And I know that at times in putting in proposals, it is beyond what one donor is willing to fund, and so we put in a proposal to more than one donor, and we make that known to the donor that we're also going for co-funding from donor B, C, and essentially. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to that issue of sort of proposals that are looking for co-funding, if that makes it stronger or weaker, and then how much donors talk with each other. I mean, are you sitting in a room saying, well, I'll fund this one if you fund this one? Or I would love to just hear you speak a bit about the coordination between donors and how that works.
Thanks. It's a really important subject. I would start to answer it this way. I think that many researchers, when they put in their proposals, they have a listing of all the major outputs and activities that they're going to deliver. But many of them do not go through to the next stage of actually calculating how many days of effort would be required to actually deliver that research program. Even if you're not 100% sure, you can have a good estimate. And so what often happens is that the proposal comes in and you have a wide range of outputs and activities. And when you look at the staffing that's being proposed, then the staff would not be able to deliver all of these outputs and activities within the time scale. So it's the point I was making earlier that there must be a clear linkage between the budgeting and the technical proposal. Now, the second point that you made, that you should always assume that the funding agencies will be talking to one another and that they will be sharing information. Now, when a proposal comes in and it says, well, we're going to submit this proposal to several funding agencies, then the question I would be asking is, if only DFID fund this proposal, can it be delivered? Or can it only be delivered if all the applications are successful? So you may need to think about staging your research proposal so that you're saying, if we get one funding agency, this is what we'll do, and we're submitting to others, and if we got the extra funding, here's what we would do. Each funding agency is looking over their shoulder at the public in the country where the money comes from. And we always have to be able to show what value for money the British funding is delivering. It's quite difficult, in fact, if we have a multi-agency proposal and it's not clear what the British contribution will actually fund and deliver. And we regularly work very closely with other funding agencies. All the time we're working with the Medical Research Council, ESRC, Wellcome Trust. I mean, we're working with these agencies all the time, and we have frequent meetings. So I hope that's helpful, Deborah. Sue, did you want to add?
I just wanted to add that recognising that some research proposals are too expensive for one funder alone to support, we do have collaborations with other funders to allow for one single place for a proposal to go, so it doesn't have to be taken separately to 3 or 4 different funders. And our joint schemes for clinical trials with Wellcome Trust and MRC, and for health systems research with Wellcome, MRC and ESRC are examples of that.
I notice on the chat box that Tim is asking, can the presenter say more about the criteria of innovation and risk? And that's a difficult question, so that's definitely one for Sue, yeah?
Well, I don't think we've got a clear definition, but what we see in a lot of proposals is people using tried and tested methods for answering research questions. And sometimes we see research proposals coming in where people have decided to use a different type of methodology or to bring in a different group of people to look at particular areas of research. And that's what we're really interested in, and interested in working in countries where there hasn't been a huge amount of research before, and in fragile states, for instance.
Post-conflict.
And post-conflict. So there is a whole set about what is the risk. And really that point is there to say we are very open to completely new ideas and completely new ways of responding to research questions if we think that the proposers have put together a credible case for why this would be effective and new. And inside DFID, it's recognised that Research and Evidence Division is the place where most of the a lot of risk can be taken. So we're not wanting people to come in worried with proposals that if it's innovative, it's not going to be looked at. We're trying to promote the idea that have new, different types of ideas, and they will be taken seriously.
Great. There is another question earlier from Imelda Bates. Imelda, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your own question?
We know that capacity building is becoming increasingly important across many projects now, and researchers are asked to build it in virtually all the time to DFID projects at least. But we also know that this is one of those drop areas for getting research out of programs and practice, because it's not an area that's very well researched and the evidence is weak and fragmented. And yet researchers who are not specialists in this area are asked to put it into their proposals. They'll be measured against it. And so I was interested to know how DFID are building on the sort of evidence base, which is weak at the moment, I agree, to try and encourage researchers to do this more systematically, and how they're evaluating proposals that come with capacity building components.
Imelda, thanks. That's another challenging question, so over to Sue.
I thought Malcolm was going to answer it. I'll answer it. we recognise just how difficult that is, and that we don't know how to do it properly at the moment. And so what we try and do is use what evidence we have. Inside Research and Evidence Division, we have a team called the Evidence Interaction Team, who are collating information from all the different sectors that are commissioning research to look at what we know works in one area and how that applies in other areas. And so when we're evaluating proposals for capacity building, we are talking to our colleagues who are more knowledgeable about that. And some of the research programs that this particular team do commission are about building capacity and looking at best ways to do that. So I think that they're using a lot of the evidence that's out there. And when we come across evidence about capacity building, like from your group, Imelda, we do feed it into them so that it's built into the whole divisional thinking about capacity building. And the Evidence Interaction Team hold the strategy that's being developed around capacity building for research within DFID. So I know I'm batting it on to other people, but just to say that it's a very difficult area, and we are thinking about it more broadly than just health.
The other thing I would add, Imelda, is that some programs are very innovative and think of many approaches to building up capacity. We're particularly looking for sustained capacity. I think it's really wonderful that individuals develop in their careers, but individuals often move on very, very quickly. So it's better from our point of view if we start to see low-income country research institutions starting to build up a sustained capacity, and that's demonstrated by them competing for funding from other agencies on their own and being successful. What we often see is that we do a really good job on building up the capacity of individuals, but I think we're not yet doing a good enough job in building up a sustained capacity in the institutions.
That's great. So we have a little more time. If anyone else wants to raise a question, please unmute yourself, *7 on your telephone. And if not, I'm going to hand back to Sue and Malcolm. I think you have a few final points to make.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity, and I hope that it's been useful and informative.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
If there are unanswered questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Maybe Annie could collate anything that comes in that we've not been able to deal with. Just wanted to talk very briefly about current opportunities that are being advertised for DFID funding. They're on the list on the slide there. I'll not go through them, but these are all opportunities that are ongoing at the moment. And for those that don't know, all DFID research outputs are recorded on the Research for Development website, or R4D as it's known, and the website has changed slightly, so the listing there is how to get through to R4D, so that you don't get lost in all the centralised government websites that are now existing. And I think basically thank you so much for your kind attention, and all the very best with your research proposals. And if we've said anything today that reduces your confidence, then I think that would be a pity. I mean, what we want to do is increase your level of confidence to make you feel that, yes, we can get this proposal in and we can get it funded. So please have a go, and if at first you don't succeed, keep trying. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Sue and Malcolm, and thanks again to Andrea and Becky from RESYST. And if you do have further questions, I've put my email there. We will be posting the Learning Lab on our site. I put a link in earlier. I'll put another link again now. And look forward to your sharing this with as many people as possible, because I think this has been extraordinarily useful. And many thanks to all.